The only thing I can think of which would make sense, and why I, for example, would take interest in Nelson Mandela or Malcolm X, is because they're standing up for things which you and I find to be so significant that they are to do with our fundamental rights as human beings. They are to do with our fundamental human dignities as human beings. And therefore, when you watch the news and we see, for example, typhoons and floods, when we see, for example, people suffering in Palestine or in Iraq or in Africa, when we see, for example, I don't know, America unilaterally invading a country, for example, and our hearts go out to villages that are bombed, what is it that we all feel? We basically feel that why should a person suffer? Why should a person die like that? And if we were in the same situation, we would also feel that. We would say, well, why is this happening to my family? Why is my children being orphaned, for example? Why is my wife being tortured? What's happening to the world when this is happening? Why don't we feel enough? If we actually consider these things as important, some may not, some may say, well, it doesn't matter, I want to live a comfortable life, this is not my concern. I'll watch the news, I'll go to work, I'll have my meal and I'll come home. I mean, this is a reality. But if we do feel that this is actually important, then somebody like Hussain alayhi salam, peace be upon him, is significant to humanity. Why? Because as was described in the previous speech, what he was standing for was that the society should not descend into corruption. So somebody like Yazid ibn Muawiyah, who drank, who carried out wars, for example, who did not care for orphans, who abused people, somebody like him should not be a head of state. Okay? He should not be allowed to run society. Now, comparably, you may look at Saddam Hussein, you may look at Hitler, you may look at other dictators in contemporary history. And that is the comparison that I'm giving. Yazid is somebody like that who was a head of state that did not deserve to be there. Hereditary succession should not be there, for example. We should appoint people on the basis of their moral merit and intelligence. Now, if that was the case, or that is what happened in Karbala, what makes Hussein's stand maybe different to others? We commemorate World War I, World War II, Holocaust, as I said, movement of Malcolm X, movement of Gandhi, and they're all noble in some way. But there is something very different about Hussein's stand. It was not political, as even some other Muslims say. It was not political at all, and this is a misconception of history. It was not political. Why? If you look at World War I and World War II, there were political objectives associated with these things. If you look at Holocaust, which is the unfortunate massacre, of course, of Jews, fine, that was a kind of genocide. If you look at what's happening in Palestine, this is a kind of genocide. But when you look at Al-Hussein alayhi salam, there's something very different about what's happening here, and this is something which tugs at my heart. As somebody, if you like, that has grown up in the United Kingdom and has multiple identities as a British person, as an Indian, as a Muslim, whatever, everything means something to me, okay? My country means something to me, but also Islam means something to me. Why does Hussain mean something to me? Because in the space of a few hours or in a day, known as the day of Ashura in Karbala, 10th of Muharram, 61 AH, 680 CE or AD, what actually happened? He decided to say, with his few family members and companions, I'm not going to give an allegiance or respect to a person that is fundamentally immoral. I'm not going to do that. Now you can take my life, can torture my family, can take away my wealth, but you are not going to get my respect. That was Hussain alayhi salam, right? Now, even though they have withheld water from him and his family for several days, even though they decided to assassinate his companions on the way to Karbala, even though they decided to kill a 6-month infant old baby who was in his hands, and he held up his baby begging the opposite army for water, and they decided to strike an arrow on the neck of this baby, he still said, no, I am not going to budge, right? This was a conscious movement. You may talk about massacre, you may talk about world wars, but the amount of brutalities happening in the space of those few hours on that day, and the resoluteness of Hussain to stand up for what he believed in, and the fact that still today it is still remembered by Shia Muslims, and that non-Muslim historians have at least written about it, shows that what Hussain did was not political, but what he did was extremely moral, trying to send a universal message up to humanity. To the extent that Gandhi has said that I have learned from Hussain how to be victorious but also oppressed. Okay, he learned how to do this. So it shows that Hussain alayhi salam still has some relevance today. As-salawat, please. So he was martyred in a very brutal way, and I don't have the time to go into it, but put it this way, that one-to-one combat was broken, and spears and arrows and things like that were shoved into his chest. His body was mutilated, his head was severed. So as I've said that's why I'm saying that this kind of killing stands out today. Why should this be relevant to us all? You may disagree with me, by the way. My argument is as follows. What Hussain was trying to do was, through absolute suffering, he was trying to ignite people's consciences. Now you look at Jesus Christ, or as Muslims say, Prophet Isa alayhi salam. Now, as Muslims believe that he was not martyred on the cross, that he, God, if you like, replaced him with another body. And whilst we of course believe that he was tortured and all these things happened, and you know there's a difference of theological opinion in scripture as to whether he died and this sort of thing between different religious sects. But one thing which is very universal about Jesus, what he did was he took a lot of suffering on his shoulders. Okay, and you may look at all prophets and saints and revolutionaries, they do the same thing. They take a lot of suffering on their shoulders. Now what Hussain did was, he tried to show people that you cannot live in a society that is full of double standards, that does not give freedom of expression, that does not give fair trials to people. Now, it's very interesting today, because if I have a legal issue, I can go to court, okay? If my wife wants to work, she can work, at least within a Western environment, okay? If I want to claim certain legal rights, I have certain recourses. But this is all rather recent, as you all know. This is not something which has been there for centuries. 1948, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Why is it that we have this Universal Charter? Because if you look at the preamble of the UDHR, which is now regarded as a model for human rights, whether it is implemented correctly is highly questionable, but it is a fair model of human rights. In the preamble, the authors and drafters of the UDHR say that due to the barbaric acts carried out by mankind, yes, mankind, that is us, due to the barbaric acts carried out by mankind, after World War II, this declaration is drafted because we draft it in order that it satisfies our conscience as human beings. Like, we don't want another World War II to happen. Now, obviously, since then, has a lot of things changed? I don't know. Maybe you can answer that. How many wars have we had? How many imperialistic tendencies have we had? Will we have World War III? I don't know. But at least the intentions of people were rather noble, and they should be commended. Muslim and non-Muslim, they should be commended. UDHR shows that humanity had some realization that we cannot fight with each other over political objectives and simply kill each other. In the Prophet's time, in Prophet Muhammad's time, it was like that. When tribes used to have a grievance with each other, they used to have a vendetta, and they used to engage in combat. It was not really dealt with in a civil manner. A lot of the civil rights that we have today are rather recent. Racism in America still continues, and the civil rights movement is still fresh in people's minds. So when people say there is equality and people say there is rights, well, in theory, yes, and maybe in some parts of the world, yes, maybe as human beings we have to some degree become civil. But can we go further? I think so. I think we can always go further. I only have to look at the way I have grown up, or the way people grow up. In the United Kingdom, for example, walking around as a Muslim, or in America walking around as a Muslim, and in Europe, you have to look behind your shoulder. I mean, Western media promotes Islam as a barbaric religion. Islam is the other. Muslim is not part of society. Muslim women who wear veils, they are a bit crazy, these people. And this is how Muslim women are described. This is reality. There is an agenda, therefore, to portray Muslims as alien and barbaric people. This is a reality, it's a fact on the ground. So clearly people have problem with Islam and Muslims, one. Number two, do women receive equal pay and equal opportunities to men? And I'm saying this across the board. Maybe they will say they don't. You look at universities, you look at government jobs, etc. Whichever way you look at it, we have maybe come some way, but there is still a sense of sensitivity and a sense of greater appreciation and respect we should have for each other, regardless of our religion and our race and our gender. This is where Hussain alayhi salam comes in. In Karbala, what happened, and this is where I want to extract the human rights and the ethics and the dignities from the event. Hussain alayhi salam was brutally martyred, which means he did not have access to his life. We would say we have a right to life. He was not granted a right to life. He simply wanted to express his moral conscience. He was not allowed to have freedom of expression and association and assembly. This is an assembly that we are having today. We have a right to form this assembly. We have a right to form a church and a synagogue, etc. Hussain had no such right. Okay. We have a right not to be tortured in the society. We know torturing goes on. Okay. We know it is practiced by governments, but we have a right not to be tortured. Okay. So in that sense, what happened to Hussain alayhi salam? And my brothers and sisters would know this, especially from the Muharram Majalis that we commemorate every year. When the soldiers went into the tents of Hussain, this was after he was martyred, they abused the women and the children. Okay? So therefore, the women and the children were abused and they were made to be orphans. Right? Another thing, Hussain did not have a right to a fair trial. Today, as I said, that if I have a view and there's some dispute, we can go to court. Hussain had no such thing. So my argument is that Hussain appeals to the orphan. He appeals to the woman. He appeals to the leaders. He appeals to every human being how to learn from oppression, how to learn from suffering and endure suffering. Salawat. But I would like to be quite specific here. You may say, well, we can see various events around the world, and I've given wars and genocides, where we see people go through suffering. I 100% agree with that. But as I said, that there was a conscious movement in the mind of Hussain, and I want to just give one example here. There was a person called Hur, okay, in Karbala, Hur, whose name literally means free man. He was a person that was initially opposed to Hussain. He was on the other side, right? Now, he started to feel guilty about his actions, and in the end he decided to join Hussein's camp. So some that decided to change sides, right? Now he came to Hussain, grandson of the Prophet, and he said, "Oh Hussain, can you ever forgive me? I was opposed to you, I was against you, I was against what you believed in, this moral movement of yours. Can you forgive me?" When he gets down from his horse and he decides to join the army of Hussain, Hussain says, "I forgive you and God forgives you." Right? Now this is absolute forgiveness to somebody that basically was an enemy of Hussain. Right? Now I'm giving this example why? When you look at faith today, whether we are Christian, whether we are Jew, whether we are Muslim, we define people in terms of categories. We say he's a Christian, he's a Jew, he's a Muslim. And if you were to come into Christianity or Judaism or Islam, what do you have to do? Everybody knows this. You have to take Shahada. You have to say, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Okay? If you want to become a Christian, you have to accept Christ, that Christ will save you. If you want to become a Jew, whether you can become a Jew, you have certain rights or etc. that you are chosen, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Each religion has its sense of prescribing certain rituals and a shahada, if you like, to a person, which is fine. And people have the right to accept the shahada and their identity in their life as they go on. So for example, me, growing up as a Shia Muslim, did I understand the Shia faith? No. Now I would like to be a Shia Muslim because I like the personality of Hussain. I like the personality of Imam Ali or the Prophet, and they mean something to me. But if you look at a person and he wants to come into a faith, he wants to accept a faith, how do you nurture a person? How do you nurture a person's mind? You nurture a person's mind by igniting their conscience, by igniting their morality, and by showing them forgiveness. One of the things, perhaps, that human beings do is we put people into categories and make assumptions about them, one. Number two, we assume that because he's a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim, he has to accept things right away. He has to accept things right away. How can that be? If I want to learn about faith, it takes time. If I want to learn about you, it takes time. Hussein's compassion and forgiveness is absolutely amazing. He does not force anybody to come into the faith. He doesn't do that. He allows people time to understand what is this ethics and morals of Islam. Which again shows, and as I don't, forgive my limitation of not understanding Swedish, but I did understand something about Taliban in the previous speech. So there is, unfortunately, extremist interpretations of Islam today. And extremist interpretations of all religions. Yes? So what is happening is there are few people that are exploiting the forgiveness and the compassion and this nurturing attitude of faith that is there within Islam and all universal religions. And Hussain is a beautiful representation of that. Salawat. The other beautiful thing is that this event of Karbala, massacre of Karbala, is not, in my view, an Islamic event. It's a universal event because there were Christians who joined the movement, Wahab, Hania and Qamar. There were, as I said, non-Muslims who joined the event, like Hur, or people perhaps that were difficult to categorize. So all walks of life seem to join this event, and that's why it has this universal appeal. The other one or two points I want to focus on, I've dealt with sort of human rights, how the fact that it can appeal to human rights, and I've dealt with how the fact that it can nurture faith. What is another ethical implication of the event? I find this one to be particularly interesting, actually. There is a philosopher called Charles Taylor, you may have heard of, I don't know, he's in Canada, and he's a Christian kind of philosopher, but I would say he redefines himself in a very different way. And he has said that we live, at least the Western civilization, lives in what is known as an age of secularity. An age of secularity. Not secularization and not secularism. Secularity. Secularity means that if somebody grows up in the West, they don't have a center point by which they revolve around. Now I just want to give an example. As I've said, that my identity is as a Shia Muslim. So I will identify maybe Prophet Muhammad or coming to this mosque in my life. I will pray 5 times a day. I will reflect on God. I will respect my parents because in the Quran it says, you know, if you must respect your parents, you cannot say oof to them. I will live by these kind of moral codes. But what he says is, if you look at Western civilization, something very interesting that is happening. Do people have transcendental and moral and spiritual identities by which they can be in touch with? This is a fundamental question he poses in his book, A Secular Age. It's a wonderful book, okay? And he says, if you look at what's happening, there's a high rates of divorces, there's disintegration of communities, there's increase of poverty, okay? There is also a sense of materialism, okay, which surrounds us. And there's a fragmentation, if you like, of those basic codes which bound people together. How many people go to church? How many people go to mosque? How many people go to synagogue? It's very low numbers. If you think, even for us, even as Muslims, it's very low numbers on Thursdays. Every Muslim will tell you on Thursdays the mosque is not packed. Okay, very few people. Churches, synagogues, the same thing. What is actually happening? Is it because mosques and churches and synagogues are not meaningful anymore? To some degree, maybe we have to hold meaningful programs. Maybe that's an argument. But the other argument, also, which is very interesting, is that society defines itself not in a way that has a reference point. Today, I'm just giving you an example, in university, you can be a Hindu, a spiritualist, and a Buddhist together. Because you can join a meditation society, right? And where you can meditate and define your spiritual identity in a variety of ways. So this idea that we are Christian and Jew and Muslim is a very old idea. A young person growing up in university defines himself or herself by a variety of beliefs. You can pick and choose your beliefs. Okay? Now, I'm just giving you a new age movement which is happening, right? So now, if that person defines himself or herself in a variety of ways, okay? And not only that, maybe his parents are divorced. He doesn't understand what a concept of a church and synagogue is. He defines God in his own unique way. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong to go on a personal quest. Each of us are on a personal quest. But what I find rather worrying is how should we define our reference point? Whatever we are, Muslim, non-Muslim, all religions, men, women, doesn't matter. What should our reference point be in society? If I want to teach ethics to my children, if I want school children to care for orphans and not care about PlayStation and Xbox, I'm just giving an example. If I want to teach something valuable to people, how do I do it? Look, there are lots of different types of people in this gathering. If I'm talking to my own brothers and sisters, it's very easy for me. I can talk about God and Prophet and 5 times of namaz, prayers, and they would understand it. But if you talk generally to people, and for example, you are to talk to me, how are you going to relate to me? I mean, I don't know what religion you are, of no religion, or rather religion, or where you are from. How are you going to relate to me? How are we going to relate to each other? It's a fundamental question if you think about it. Are we bounded by our human nature? Well, I can say my human nature is to follow my passions and my subjective desires. Okay? I listen to you, but I don't have to care for what's happening in the news. I don't have to care for orphans on the street. I don't have to give in charity. Now think about it. What happens to society? My point here, and this is where Hussain becomes relevant, this is my conclusion in the next few minutes. Hussain's model and his sacrifice was for the well-being of society. He allowed me and you to relate to each other by sympathizing and empathizing for the average Joe on the street, for the average Joe that wants to find faith, for the average woman that wants to find something meaningful in her life, and for the average man that wants to find something very meaningful in her life, in his life. And hence, what perhaps is very interesting is, whilst if you accept his hypothesis or his thesis of a secular age, Hussein's model or his sacrifice can be relevant. Because if you teach this in schools, if you teach this in universities, if you commemorate this like we do, World War I and World War II and the Holocaust and the crucifixion of Christ, for example, if you were to send this out as a universal model, which Muslims need to do, and Shia Muslims in particular have the responsibility to do it, and we should fulfill it more. Maybe we haven't fulfilled it in the past, but now is a good opportunity. And we do this in a universal way, people would be in touch with their human side by relating to this beautiful, sacrificial and loving figure of Hussain. They would feel, what did this man go through? Look at what he did. Look at this baby that he held in his hands who was martyred. Look at his sister Zainab, who had to endure so much suffering. How she had to look after orphans. We always need reminders. We always need heroes. The death of Nelson Mandela is a reminder for us that we always need heroes. And my argument to you is that Hussain can be a hero for humanity. Salawat. I want to end on 2 quotes and then that's it. There are some words ascribed to Hussain. You may say it's a kind of poetry. Whether you want to believe it's authentic or not doesn't matter. But this is what I believe his feeling was during this massacre of Karbala. He's reported to have said, I have abandoned the creation in your love, O God. I have orphaned my children so that I may see you, O God. If the swords were to cut me into pieces in your love, even then my heart would not long for other than you. Okay? This was the strength and the courage of Hussain. And the last quote is from a statement by Professor Kostas Douzinas, originally from Greece, who is a professor at Birkbeck University, and he has said the following. He has said, unfortunately today, academics and universities opt for book contracts, and we are people that look for our next contract and for our next paycheck. Unfortunately, the European university that was wedded to truth and justice in the way of Socrates is no longer. The European university needs to focus and concentrate on world problems and practical problems. Academics that opt for a life of accommodation and comfort are not real academics or scholars. And this also applies to Muslims as well, Muslim scholars. All scholars must, with their work and apply and give their theories to produce a better society. Otherwise, what is the point of a European university or any university? Salawat. Jazakallah for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Imran. Vi ligger väldigt långt före tiden som vi hade avsatt. Men vi har en punkt kvar på vår agenda idag. Och det är ett tacktal av vår ordförande som även är min far. Jag ska ropa fram honom snart, men den här utvärderingen jag pratade om innan kommer att fixas under tiden som vi äter. Och jag kommer lägga det på bordet där ute. Och den är främst till för våra gäster som är här, som inte tillhör församlingen så att säga. För vad ni resten tycker, det vet jag redan. Men det är främst till för våra gäster och jag kommer att lägga det där ute och jag kommer att säga till er när jag har lagt det så att ni kan fylla i om ni vill. Då vill jag härmed välkomna vår ordförande Salim Rouhani för några ord. Men salawat ala Muhammad.
Ärade gäster, de ledda, mina äldre bröder och systrar. Jag hälsar er också med de ord som vi har tidigare hört. Salamun alaikum. Det ger mig en enorm glädje idag att få se er här idag. Det är första gången i vår församlingshistoria att vi har fått så många gäster tillsammans. Och jag hoppas att ni har funnit dagens program intressant. Så mycket intressant att ni vill se flera sådana. Och att vi får möjlighet att kunna bjuda in er. Och jag tror och jag är helt övertygad om att ni håller med att det är genom sådana här program och dialog som vi kan göra mer nytta till samhället på ett eller annat sätt. Jag ska bara ge lite bakgrund för vår församling. Det är ju ungefär 35 år sedan som den här församlingen i Märsta bildades. Och det var en handfull människor som kom från Östafrika efter Idi Amins tid. När vi kastades ut 1972. De kom hit och de fann de kände att det fanns ett behov, precis som alla andra människor, att vi behöver göra någonting utöver vår religion, kultur i den här nya främmande land. Så de började med att samlas hemma i liten skara. Och det här gjorde de ett tag tills de kände sig att vi är nu så pass starka och vi behöver sätta in egna medel och sånt, så att de tog ett steg fram och hyrde lägenheter som de använde som lokaler för samlingslokaler. Och detta fortsatte de med. Och 1993 så fick vi äran att få inviga oss i de här lokalerna. Och om man tänker efter så är det 2013. Så att vi har varit här 20 år i de här lokalerna. Och meningen var faktiskt att vi skulle ha hållit en evenemang för att fira 20 år i det här centret. Men på grund av olika omständigheter så blev det inte av. Men icke för tid. Jag tror att det här samlingen idag kan ju också vara en sån där vi markerar att vi har varit här 20 år. Och jag vill också säga så här att vi har kallat det här centret för Zainabia Islamic Center. Och varför Zainabia? Och ni kanske hörde den föregående talaren, han nämnde Zainab. Zainab var syster till Hussain. Och om man tittar på Hussains